66% of American adults say they've made a commitment to Jesus. That is 30 million more Americans today who say they're committed to Jesus.
Okay, we're here in the aptly named Talbotron 3000. I don't know why I just picked that name.
Why 3000?
Well, isn't there like a science fiction thing, Mystery Science Theater 3000 or something? We're actually doing this Lead the Way tour. You and I are speaking at several events, but it's powered by State of the Church. What's the State of the Church initiative?
We've been tracking the State of the Church for a long time, since the company was started in 1984 by George and Nancy Barna. And George started working on State of the Church reports and various things that would describe the intersection of faith and culture. And we've been going back into the archives and looking at how things have stayed the same and how they've changed. So we call it State of the Church. We started working with Glue in 2020 for State of the Church. Now we're in 2025. Soon to be the year 3000. Where
That's
the
true. And the Talbot 3000. We like to pace ourselves, looking ahead.
Maybe this is an actual time machine.
People are interested in the State of the Church in ways that I didn't expect, because I didn't expect to see this data shifts.
Yeah.
So tell us some of the thinking, and then when you begin to see pickup in the data.
Well, I think you're right. I actually think the last 3 to 5 years since COVID, there's been a lot of shifting, both in the workplace and obviously in politics, in the economy, and also in the realm of faith. So some of the things we're seeing are an increase in the percentage of people who say they're committed to Jesus. So 66% of American adults say they've made a commitment to Jesus. That's still important in their life. That's up from 54% in the year 2021. So that's been a huge increase, 12% increase. That is 30 million more Americans today.
That's shocking. Yeah.
Who say they're committed to Jesus.
Yeah.
And, you can look at media like The Chosen and He Gets Us. But I think Gen Z is putting its own stamp on Christianity and on their faith, because just a few years ago, almost 2.5 years ago, we asked, are you more open to God today than you were before the pandemic? And Gen Z, 59% said yes. Among millennials, it was a majority. Older generation said no.
34% of boomers said yes, so it was much lower.
Yeah.
Than I memorized that stat.
Yeah.
Because I've shared your stats a lot.
So I think that was like a canary in a coal mine of some change. And as a result of that, I think there's some really cool ways in which, we're going to see continued interest in Jesus, but like increase in percentage of young people who are attending church, really, really important trends. In addition, we're also seeing like young women who are less likely to attend church than young men, which is a huge shift.
Big shift. From
comparing that to other times in history.
What's causing a rise in interest in these things?
Well, a good researcher should say that we don't know the answers to why. Yeah. And so we don't. We don't know if it's the media. We don't know if it's larger forces at work. There has been a growing divide between the politics of young men and of young women over the last decade or so. And again, this really interesting thing, I kind of alluded to it in our last episode, but the idea that being a 20-something is very different today than it was a generation or two ago. And as a result of that, the experience of being a young man, where you may or may not be married, you may or may not have kids as a 20-something, and especially the experience of being a young woman, is very different.
Yeah.
Young women are more likely to be college educated than young men today. Men and women come to social media for different things. Women come more for community and encouragement and sort of how to live their best life, and tend to come for a different set of content. I think recognizing some of these differences are another key part of making a difference with the generations that we're called to serve.
Yeah, I think you're right on. Part of it is that the modern, in Ed Stetzer's view, the modern experiment has failed. And, even if you look at politics, the post-World War II consensus is collapsing. And so it's around the world. I think just people realize the world's not working. The promises of modernity have failed. Some are turning to Jesus, which I love. Some are turning to spirituality. A lot of young men are turning to Andrew Tate or Joe Rogan. Again, I don't put them in the same category, but so for me, the unmooring of the modern world can lead to some really great spiritual opportunities, or some really toxic and terrible things as well. I'm kind of hoping that we're going to see a repeat of the late 60s, where we actually saw the Jesus People movement birth out of some of those cultural moments. But I got to tell you, it kind of reminds me, I'm a bit of a nerd. I love the movie Independence Day. The scientist who's like at Area 51, he said, well, all of a sudden everything just started coming on and happened in the last few years. Well, I think that's kind of Like, we've been thinking and praying about these things, and now all of a sudden there are these shifts in data. But part of my concern is I need Christians not to get caught up in some of the isms of culture. I think we're at a precarious spot.
Yeah.
Like, some churches have just kind of gone, in some ways, off the deep end to the left and the right. It's important to say both, with losing the focus on showing and sharing the love of Jesus, losing the focus on biblical discipleship. So to me, like, I'm not sure the state of the church, where we talking about the state of the culture, I got real questions about the state of the church. Will we be found faithful? And I want to be. So talk to us about the health of the church. We talk about the openness of culture. Where's the health of the church fit into this?
Well, I'll say that I think overall there's a lot of really good things that are happening. And again, in some ways, the church itself is positioned to be recipients of the refugees of this cultural moment. But I would say there's a couple things that I would be concerned about. One, the disconnection with women is a big one.
It's a pretty big red flag. I mean, it's just Gen Z where more men than women come. I mean, women are the backbone of the church.
Yeah. So I think that's a big red flag. I think another one is, I think COVID opened the possibility that pastors might imagine some new wineskins, like imagine some new models of ministry. I mean, again, I want to say this really clearly. Like, I am a huge proponent of great preaching and teaching. I've heard the analogy that, like, great preaching and teaching is sort of like daily bread. You know, you don't remember every meal, but you wouldn't be who you are today at a molecular level if you didn't feast on actual calories. You wouldn't be who you are without teaching and preaching, because Christ walks among us. But I think we've overemphasized preaching and teaching, and as a rhetorical and training and persuasive tool. We need better training tools, better models.
I want to disagree with you and defend you at the same time.
Okay.
Because I think we need more and better teaching and preaching.
Yes.
But statistically, that's not how people are best discipled.
Correct.
But again, I don't think I disagree with you. But I'm also just saying I want to see better teaching and preaching. But so what then?
Every week we should.
Yeah,
have,
exactly.
Like, if every preacher got better and better at preaching, we would have a stronger church.
I love it.
And if every preacher got better at thinking about the work of the ministry as not primarily propped up through the once a week sermon, then we would also be better, because
no question. And probably the statistical growth takes place far more. I was part of the study you did with Right Now Media, the small group study.
Yeah.
I mean, what moves the dial is people in community learning with one another.
Correct. And that's mentoring. That's in a household level and in a small group level. And you think about how to live in the modern world as a Christian. These are complex things about how to have conversations with people we disagree with, how to think about doctrine. You know, our friend Dr. John Dixon talks about the early church would have been more easily recognized as a kind of philosophical training school than as a congregation that we think of today. And his claim, if I get this right, you'll correct me, I think, is that before a person was baptized, the person had to have 150 hours
something like that,
of content.
Yeah. Catechesis and all that. Yeah.
I'm convinced that we have to have a better kind of like 101, 201, 301, just to use the reference of a...
Yeah, you just spoke to about every pastor who's 35 or above. The one I went to, well, that's also academically, but I was thinking in terms of the Saddleback model. But you have increasing levels of detail and complexity.
Correct. Of like, talk about human sexuality and sex, which is a critically important subject. It's one of the reasons people have a negative opinion of Christianity. It's one of the reasons people leave Christianity, about sex being within the context of marriage between one woman and one man, and some of the questions of LGBTQ and trans issues. You're not going to just preach your way through that.
Right.
For
it's
lots
easy
of
to
reasons.
get up there and make a few pithy statements and get an applause line.
Correct.
But you have to. These are people in our church.
Yeah, and not just that, but like that's the reason why the church has to be a kind of hospital for the wounded and traumatized to be restored back to life in Christ. We need to have all aspects of the church working in concert to be the effective, life-transforming mission of Jesus in the world.
Like, you're dropping, is it new data drops every month?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, stateofthechurch.com.
So you're dropping the data there. What future things should we expect to see and hear from these data drops? What's coming up?
Well, one of the things we're looking at is Gen Z and mental health, which we just, this month, launched some new studies on that. So that's brand new and fresh. We did a qualitative analysis of sort of interventions that local churches and schools and parents can have. Explored some really critical themes. So, Gen Z and mental health is one. We're looking at various worship preferences. So, the ways people experience a congregational, like what do they want out of a church. We're exploring people's perceptions of Jesus and some of the ways they create him in their own image, some of the barriers to following Jesus instead of a my-sized Jesus. We're updating things on the number of times people attend in a typical month. So that's another thing. We've been trying to reverse engineer some of our statistics to get a good, accurate read of some of those kind of basic, like small group attendance and volunteering and giving and some of those basic important topics.
All right, so give us kind of a few. The state of the church is what? The President of the United States stands for and says the state of the country is, state of the union is blank. So give us kind of a paragraph or two about what the state of the church is.
The state of the church is on the precipice of a changing world that is causing us to be hopeful about people's spiritual openness. The state of the church is also kind of leaning backwards in some ways towards the past, and I think that's a bad thing. Towards past methods. The gospel never changes, but our methods can be time bound, and I think pastors need to remember how the early months of COVID caused us to really be open. I mean, let's try digital church. Let's try this. Let's try these other ideas. And we need to really inspire and equip the next generation of Christians and of pastors. I think we need a whole new renaissance of how we think about ministry and mission today to meet the rising questions of this generation.
David Kinnaman, State of the Church. Go to stateofthechurch.com. Thanks for being with us in the Talbot Around 3000.